The studio was electric with anticipation. The seats were filled, the cameras were rolling, and millions of viewers tuned in from the comfort of their homes, eagerly awaiting an interview with one of Hollywood's most revered figures, Morgan Freeman. At 86 years old, he was a living legend, a man whose deep, commanding voice had narrated the essence of life itself. Poised, dignified, and respected, Morgan was no stranger to the spotlight. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different. As he walked onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. Some were even moved to tears. His presence commanded reverence, as though his every step carried the weight of a lifetime of stories and wisdom. Morgan took his seat, folding his hands gracefully in his lap, his gaze sweeping across the room. But something was off. The host, Vanessa Clark, known for her bold and often ruthless approach, had a different agenda. She leaned forward, her lips curling into a smirk. "So Morgan," she began, her voice smooth but laced with a cutting edge, "at your age, do you ever wake up wondering if today might be your last?" A chill settled over the room. The once lively energy faltered and the audience fell into an uneasy silence. No one expected the question to land so heavily. But Morgan? He didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands tighter, his eyes locking with hers. There was an unspoken tension, a storm brewing just beneath the surface, and Vanessa had no idea what she had just set in motion. She continued, her words venomous. "You've played God," she said, tilting her head with a mocking air. "But let's be real. You're just a man, an old man. What's it like knowing your time is almost up?" Gasps rippled through the studio. An elderly woman in the front row pressed a hand to her heart. But Morgan, unfazed, exhaled quietly and shook his head. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the countless people in the audience, those who had grown older and felt overlooked, dismissed as if their time had passed. When Morgan spoke, the room fell into absolute silence. "Miss Clark," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight, "have you ever sat beside someone as they took their final breath?" Vanessa blinked. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She had been expecting a challenge, but this? She wasn't prepared for this. Morgan continued, his voice low, almost reverent. "I have. Many times. I've held the hands of dear friends as they spoke their last words. And do you know what they regret the most?" The room held its breath. "They never longed for more money or fame," Morgan said, his eyes locking onto Vanessa's. "They wish they had loved more, forgiven more, cherished life more." The camera zoomed in on the audience. Some were wiping away tears, others were simply frozen in awe of Morgan's words. His gaze never wavered from Vanessa's, his expression soft yet firm, as if imparting a truth that transcended time and circumstance. "You ask me what it feels like to be old?" Morgan's voice grew softer, deeper, but still undeniably powerful. "It feels like a privilege denied to many." The room erupted into applause. Some stood, clapping through their tears. Yet Morgan wasn't finished. He leaned in slightly, eyes still fixed on Vanessa. And then for the first time, the tables turned. The host, known for her ability to dominate every interview, was left speechless. The applause from the audience reverberated through the studio, but Vanessa Clark sat still, unable to recover from the words Morgan Freeman had just delivered. She had expected to control the conversation, to challenge him, perhaps even break him down. But instead, she found herself exposed. The sharpness of her previous questions seemed trivial now, washed away by the calm strength of his response. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, attempting to regain her footing. But Morgan wasn't finished. The atmosphere in the room had changed. It was no longer an interview. It had become a reckoning. Vanessa, trying to maintain her composure, leaned forward once more. "Well, Morgan," she said, her voice a little less confident now, "that was quite the speech." Morgan gave her a small, knowing smile. "That wasn't a speech, Vanessa," he replied gently, his voice steady and unshaken. "It was the truth." Vanessa's lips quivered, but she pressed on, attempting to steer the conversation back to her comfort zone. "All right, let's change the subject," she said, her tone trying to regain its usual sharpness. She glanced at her cue cards before continuing. "Your childhood. Your mother was a cleaner. Your father left when you were just a boy. Do you ever resent having to fight so much harder than most? The question hung in the air, a direct jab at Morgan's past. A hush fell over the audience as Vanessa waited for his reaction. She had chosen this question carefully, hoping it would get under his skin, but Morgan Freeman simply smiled, as if he had anticipated her attempt. Yes, he began, his voice soft yet filled with a deep strength. My father left, and my mother worked as a cleaner. But do I resent it? No, Vanessa. I thank them. The words took Vanessa by surprise. She blinked, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. This wasn't the response she had expected. She had pushed him, but Morgan had turned her question into something entirely different. Morgan leaned in, locking eyes with her. You see, he continued, his voice resonating with emotion. My father taught me something very important. He showed me exactly what kind of man I didn't want to become. He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. And my mother, she taught me how to survive. The camera zoomed in on the audience. In the front row, a woman pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Even some of the crew behind the scenes were seen wiping their eyes. It was a rare moment of raw humanity, and the power of Morgan's words echoed throughout the room. Pain is a teacher, Morgan said quietly, and it taught me well. Vanessa's usual poise faltered. She had underestimated the depth of Morgan Freeman's wisdom, and now she found herself struggling to keep up with his calm, unflinching resolve. She shifted in her seat, her confidence waning, but she wasn't ready to concede just yet. You asked if I regret my past, Morgan continued, his voice steady as ever. The truth is, I carry it with me every single day, but I don't carry it as a burden. I carry it as a reminder that I'm still here. A deep, collective sigh echoed through the room. Morgan Freeman had just transformed his past pain into something profound, something that resonated with everyone in the studio, and it was leaving Vanessa without a response. She sat frozen, the reality of the moment sinking in. This was no longer an interview for the sake of entertainment. It had become an encounter that had the power to change lives. Vanessa's mind raced. She had spent her entire career asking the hard questions, priding herself on making others uncomfortable. But now, for the first time, she found herself questioning her own motives, her own approach. Morgan noticed the shift in her demeanor. With a calm and knowing gaze, he turned back to the crowd, his words carrying across the room. The problem with the world today, he said slowly, is that too many people look at their past and feel bitterness. But when I look at mine, I feel gratitude. The audience, deeply moved, erupted into applause. Some openly wept, while others sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of what Morgan had just shared. The room had been transformed by his words. And as Vanessa sat there trying to regain control, it was clear to everyone in the studio that she had just been outmatched. Not by the force of Morgan Freeman's fame, but by the force of his character, his life experience, and the simple truth that reverberated through the air. You see, Vanessa, Morgan continued, his voice now quieter but just as powerful, when you stop fearing the end and start embracing life, that's when you truly start living. The room was completely still. Then, as if on cue, applause filled the air. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Vanessa, for the first time in her career, was left speechless. Morgan Freeman, the man who had witnessed so much and had spoken so many truths over the years, had just given her, and everyone watching, a lesson in humility, perspective, and grace. The question that Vanessa had posed so flippantly had been turned back on her, and the audience knew it. The power of Morgan's words had left an indelible mark on everyone in the room. Vanessa finally blinked, trying to regain her composure. But it was clear. This interview was no longer about her. It was about something much bigger. And as the applause continued, one thing was certain. Morgan Freeman had once again proven that true strength doesn't come from dominance or control. It comes from wisdom, humility, and the courage to face life with grace. The applause reverberated through the studio, but it wasn't just for Morgan Freeman. No, it was for the moment itself. A moment that had transcended the boundaries of a typical interview and transformed into something profound. Morgan had not only silenced Vanessa Clark, but had silenced the entire room, leaving them hanging on his every word. Vanessa, who had been the queen of sharp questions and ruthless interviews, sat frozen in her seat, her eyes wide with realization. She had underestimated Morgan, thought she could corner him with her biting questions, but she had been the one who was cornered. Her usual composure, the control she wielded in every conversation, had unraveled before the entire world. Morgan Freeman, meanwhile, sat back in his chair, unfazed by the whirlwind of emotions swirling around him. His eyes, calm and steady, surveyed the room, not with arrogance, but with a deep understanding of the human condition. The silence in the studio seemed to stretch on, as though everyone, including Vanessa herself, was holding their breath. It was Vanessa who broke the silence, but her voice was no longer as certain or sharp. She cleared her throat, her hand gripping her cue cards tightly as if they were her lifeline. "Well, Morgan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that was quite a story." Morgan didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at her, his gaze penetrating, as though waiting for her to truly understand what had just transpired. Finally he spoke, his voice warm but firm. "You see, Vanessa," he began, leaning forward slightly, "wisdom is not something you can manufacture with harsh words or confrontation. It comes from understanding, from living through life's hardships, and from learning to turn pain into something meaningful." Vanessa swallowed hard. Her usual retorts had abandoned her. She had been forced to confront something she had spent her career avoiding, the truth about herself. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly struggling to regain control of the conversation, but Morgan's presence seemed to dominate the space. "Let me tell you something," Morgan continued, his voice unwavering. "We all face pain. We all face loss. But it's how we deal with it that shapes us. And when you learn to let go of bitterness, when you start embracing the lessons life gives you, that's when you find peace." His words were like a balm to a wound Vanessa hadn't even known existed. The realization hit her slowly, deeply, and as much as she wanted to push back, she couldn't. The studio felt like a different world, no longer a place for sharp words and confrontation, but a space for introspection and raw honesty. Vanessa, still visibly shaken, shifted once more. She had been prepared for Morgan to falter, for him to get defensive or lose his cool, but instead she had found herself defenseless. For the first time in her career, she found herself searching for the right words, struggling to match the gravity of what had just been said. "So, Morgan," she said, trying to steady herself, "do you really think that people can change? That they can learn to live with the pain and regret of their past?" Morgan's expression softened. He exhaled slowly, considering her question. The audience, who had been hanging on every word, leaned in, sensing the next chapter of this unexpected exchange. "Yes," he replied quietly. "People can change, but change comes from within. It's about recognizing that the past doesn't have to define you. It's about understanding that the love you give, the compassion you show, the wisdom you impart, those are the things that matter in the end. Not the mistakes, not the regrets. What matters is what you choose to become." Vanessa blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. The powerful, sharp interviewer, the woman who had made a career out of exposing others, was now the one being exposed, forced to confront the depth of her own questions and actions. "And what about you, Morgan?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost reverent. "What do you hope people will remember about you when you're gone?" The question, a typical one for any interview, seemed almost trivial now in the face of the profound exchange they had just shared. Vanessa's eyes searched Morgan's face, trying to anticipate what he might say, but Morgan didn't hesitate. "Vanessa," he said softly, "I don't think it's about what people remember about me when I'm gone. The real question is, what will they remember about themselves? What will they remember about the lives they've touched, the love they've given, and the way they've lived?" The studio fell silent again, and this time there was no tension, no discomfort, just the heavy silence of a truth too deep to ignore. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She wiped at them quickly, trying to maintain her composure, but it was clear she had been shaken to her core. The years of deflecting, of confronting others with sharp, uncomfortable questions, had come to a halt. And for the first time in her career, Vanessa Clark had to ask herself the same hard questions she had asked others. Morgan noticed her struggle. His voice, warm and steady, broke through the quiet. "You see, Vanessa," he said gently, "we all have the power to change, to make our lives meaningful. It's not too late for any of us. It's never too late." Vanessa inhaled sharply. For a moment, she was speechless. And in that moment, the entire studio knew. Morgan Freeman hadn't just changed the tone of the interview. He had changed the course of Vanessa's life. The audience, moved beyond words, erupted into applause. But this time, the applause wasn't just for Morgan Freeman. It was for the moment itself. The moment when truth, wisdom, and vulnerability collided in a way that left everyone in awe. Morgan leaned back in his chair, his face softening into a small, knowing smile. The battle was over. Not because he had defeated Vanessa, but because he had shown her and the world that the greatest power lies in embracing life, with all its struggles, with love and grace. Vanessa sat quietly, her hands trembling as she clutched her cue cards, but deep down she knew something had changed within her. She had just witnessed something truly transformative, and in that moment, she realized that Morgan Freeman had given her the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to truly listen. The applause slowly subsided, but the atmosphere in the studio remained electric. The powerful exchange between Vanessa Clark and Morgan Freeman had transcended the format of the interview. It was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. As the cameras swept across the audience, there wasn't a single person who wasn't visibly moved. Many were wiping away tears. Others sat frozen, processing the profound exchange they had just witnessed. Vanessa, still struggling to regain her composure, sat silently, her thoughts racing. For the first time in her career, she had been forced to confront herself, not as an interviewer, but as a human being. The woman who had made a living out of pushing others to confront their pasts, their mistakes, and their fears, now found herself facing her own truths. The walls she had built around herself, the sharp persona she had perfected, all seemed to crumble in the wake of Morgan Freeman's quiet wisdom. Morgan, on the other hand, remained calm, his deep voice still resonating through the room. He had said everything he needed to say. There was no ego in his words, no desire to prove anything. He had simply shared his truth, his wisdom, and his experience. And in doing so, he had changed the trajectory of the interview, and perhaps even changed the lives of those who had witnessed it. As the show came to a close, the production team signaled that they were wrapping up. Vanessa, now visibly shaken, turned to Morgan, her voice quiet and sincere. "Morgan," she said, her tone much softer than before, "thank you for everything." Morgan nodded, his smile gentle. "It's not about thank you, Vanessa. It's about living with purpose. That's all any of us can do." Vanessa's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she looked at him, the weight of his words still settling in her heart. She had come into this interview determined to be in control, to ask the hard-hitting questions, but instead she had been the one to receive the most important lesson of her career. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience began to file out, there was a sense of reverence in the air. This wasn't just another talk show, it was an experience, one that had touched something deep within everyone present. Morgan Freeman had left his mark, not through grand gestures or showmanship, but through the quiet power of his presence and the wisdom that flowed from him effortlessly. He had turned a potentially uncomfortable interview into a moment of profound self-reflection, a moment that would remain in the hearts and minds of the audience for a long time to come. The producers, who had witnessed the entire exchange from behind the scenes, were in awe. They had seen countless interviews in their careers, but nothing like this. Morgan Freeman had not just answered questions, he had given a masterclass in grace, humility, and strength. And it was clear that this was a moment that would go down in history as one of the most unforgettable in the world of television. Lesson from the story. The story of Morgan Freeman's unforgettable interview serves as a powerful reminder that true wisdom is not about confrontation or domination. It's about understanding, humility, and compassion. Throughout his life, Morgan Freeman had faced immense challenges, pain, loss, and adversity. but he had learned to transform those experiences into valuable lessons for others. The key lesson here is that life's greatest strength comes not from avoiding pain or fear, but from embracing it and using it to grow. Pain is inevitable, but it's how we choose to respond to it that defines us. By letting go of bitterness and resentment, we open ourselves to the possibility of healing, of love, and of profound personal growth. Morgan's response to Vanessa's harsh questions wasn't defensive or angry. It was a quiet, powerful reminder that wisdom comes with age, experience, and the willingness to learn from one's struggles. He didn't shy away from his past. Instead, he acknowledged it, learned from it, and used it to guide his present. This in turn gave him the power to influence those around him, not through force or dominance, but through quiet strength and deep understanding. Vanessa's transformation in the story reflects the potential for change in all of us. She began the interview with arrogance, using her position to make others uncomfortable. But by the end, she was forced to look inward and ask herself the tough questions she had so often posed to others. Morgan Freeman had given her the opportunity to confront her own fears and insecurities. And in doing so, he had helped her see that it's never too late to change, to grow, and to live with purpose. Ultimately, the lesson is this: the true power in life is not in what we can take from others, but in what we can give. The love we share, the wisdom we impart, and the way we choose to live. These are the things that matter. It's not about how much time we have, but how we choose to use that time to create something meaningful. Morgan Freeman's legacy isn't just in the roles he played or the words he spoke on screen. It's in the quiet moments of wisdom, like the ones shared in that interview, where he reminded us all that life is measured by the love we give, not by the years we live. And it's never too late to start living that truth. As Vanessa left the studio that night, she knew she had been changed, not by the interview itself, but by the lessons Morgan Freeman had imparted. And though the cameras had turned off, the true transformation had just begun.